Hey there everybody, and welcome to some more RPG horror story cringe with DnD Doge. In today's episode, we have a tale about a Star Wars DM that doesn't take any chances after encountering that guy. A story about a player that gets extremely salty after meeting the consequences of her own actions, and much more. So without further ado, let's get right into the cringe. Edgy players shoot at me, but I dodged the bullet. Not literally. By Reddit user rnunez12. More than a horror story, this is a situation where I got to instantly kick the problem player before it was too late. I'm currently a Star Wars DM that decided to turn his game into a small West Marches server because the gaming group got too big. We are playing through Discord, and the group is currently at 12 or so players. I post a gaming session once or twice a week, and the ones that can join on that date get to play. This system is working for me until someone in the group gathers courage to also DM, or we find someone else willing to. Now, I didn't outright ban Sith or evil characters in general, because I was planning to make sessions for that type of character in the future. But I did ask that most of the characters should be good or neutral, just to make my life easier while DMing for such a big group. You know, having both Jedi and Sith in the same group would make the story very hard to move forward. After all, in a West Marches, you can have multiple characters, so if anyone wants to play an evil one, they just have to wait. Still, a couple of players made evil characters, but explaining that in their backgrounds, and most importantly, promising to hide that from the other characters, say Jedis, and agreeing to let their characters go if they ever got caught. Now cue this problem player. He was added to the group along with a couple more people through one of the players that had been in the group for the longest time, so I didn't see an issue with accepting them blindly. However, right after reading the server rules, especially the rule about evil characters, problem player says in the chat that he's going to make a chaotic evil character. Oh, but don't worry, he's not going to kill his party. He's just going to do all the murder and torture that the good guys don't want to do. I told him that this concept was going to be problematic, but he told me that he'll make a villain that would destroy the world to save the ones he loves. Now, I know the discussion on alignment can go on forever, but I think we can all agree that that's not chaotic evil, right? So I told him that. He responded, "Well, it is for me. I'm going to make that character, and it's going to be an anti-hero." Then I said, "No you won't," and instantly kicked him from the server. A few minutes later, he messaged me, telling me to actually learn Star Wars lore, and saying, "Typical Disney fan." I guess that implies that he's been in this situation before, but who knows. Anyway, I did this because I feel he was disrespectful by coming into the server, and not even 5 minutes in, already wanting to impose his own rules and vision of the game. Most people in the server agreed that he had to go, and were relieved that I did that after reading his messages. But the player who brought him in was a little upset, and a couple of people told me that I should have given him a chance. So I guess this is also an Am I the A-hole post. What do you people on Reddit think? Nope, not the a-hole. OP told that player multiple times that that type of character wouldn't be allowed in the current game. And even though he did so, the problem player didn't just ask again and again, but blatantly told OP that he was going to make that character. So, in my opinion, OP did the right thing by just nipping that problem in the bud, by just booting him. Though, what do you all think? Let's move on. Killed a player character, and they got salty. Am I the a-hole? By Reddit user, the Lolomancer. So, I'm going to try to be as objective as I can here. This happened a while back, but it's kind of haunting me now, so I wanted to ask the opinion of the masses about this. I was DMing a homebrew world that's designed to be fairly dark and gritty. In session 0, I made it clear that the world has a lot of differences. I go into lore, and everyone is loving the depth of the world building. Most notable to this post I mentioned that certain forms of magic are lost and are effectively banned unless I decide that they're not. These are 1. Instantaneous travel, any teleport longer than Dimension Thor, or any planar travel. 2. Bringing back the dead, revivify, raise dead, etc. And 3. Spells that violate minds, dominate person, modify memory, etc. A couple of the players ask why, and I explain my reasoning, and the players are fully on board. The game starts, and everyone is loving it. Lots of great roleplay. Players get attached to their characters and even have art made for them. There's laughing, crying, and everything in between. The combats are tough and intense, and the player characters are used to intelligent NPCs reacting intelligently. 12 sessions in, and the players are confronted by the special forces of an empire that they've been undermining for a while now. This has been a long time coming, and the players know that they're being hunted. They size up the opposition and get decent enough rolls that I explain in no uncertain terms that these guys are effectively their counterparts, an intelligent, organized squad of killers with class levels. One of the players suggests pulling back to a more advantageous position, but it's shot down by the rest of the party. It's a pretty smart idea, so I throw them an "Are you sure about that?" but it gets pushed past. I figure it's fine. If they start losing, they can just retreat. It's 5 player characters against 4 fighters and 1 wizard. I did decide to remove Action Surge from the NPC fighters, but otherwise make them evenly leveled and geared with the player characters. The fight starts, and the team's Hexblade Warlock almost immediately throws herself behind enemy lines, far from his team, and cuts down one of the commandos with some fantastic rolls. Speaking in Frightened Common, the enemy leader, the wizard, tells them to focus down the threat, and the entire team collapses onto the Hexblade. Hexblade's shield spell gets counterspelled by the wizard, and the player character sorcerer is too far back to contest it, so Hexblade gets dropped in 1 round. The team rushes to back her up, and the cleric casts a healing word in full view of every opposing fighter, and the Hexblade gets back up. I'm a little annoyed that I've talked so much about these guys being intelligent opponents for the Hexblade to simply Leroy Jenkins in. But while I want my introduction of the commando squad to be menacing, I don't want it to feel completely out of left field. Right at the start of the Hexblade's turn, I say, the leader calls out that you have a healer and commands his men to finish the job properly when they drop you, expecting that to scare her enough to pull back to her team and likely retreat from the fight. Though, Hexblade begins her turn with 3 hit points and being flanked by a pair of enemy fighters, one slightly wounded and the other completely fresh. And rather than disengage, she decides to stand her ground. I give another, "Are you sure about that?" and she is sure. I assume that she knows what she's doing, and she does a good chunk of damage, but on the enemy fighter's turn, she goes down again, and as instructed, the fighters finish the job, attacking her on the ground and forcing her to fail all of her death saves before the cleric's next turn. I play up the death scene in as cinematic a way as I can, and give the character a hero's death as she fights to the bitter end, giving the player an opportunity to say any last words to her team or spit blood at her killer's face as she goes down. She chose to stand rather than run, so it confuses me that the player is silent through this and isn't picking up the balls that I'm throwing. The rest of the players want to roleplay their character's grief in the moment, but the Hexblade's player is way too quiet, so everyone just kind of moves past it, and the session ends. 4 days later, the Hexblade player sends me a massive essay about how what I did was unfair, and that I shouldn't have killed her character without her permission, but that she'll let it go as long as I let her come back from the dead. I reply that I gave her a ton of hints, and the fact that she chose to go ahead made me assume that she was aware of the consequences. Plus, the whole point of removing revives was to make death feel heavy and narratively defining. She replies that she's autistic and doesn't get in-game cues, though she never mentioned her mental health before, and was pretty good about recognizing cues for several sessions before this one. She said that I should have paused the game and spoken to her out of character, and that now the art that she had commissioned is useless. I tell her that her character is an adventurer and has been in dozens of similar lethal situations before, and that maybe if she had played with the team instead of rushing in, she would have fared better. She then lashes at me, saying that I'm blaming her now, and begins to throw insults at me. So I tell her that she's no longer welcome at my table, and block her. I assume she blew up at some of the other players, because they then started blowing up my DMs, trying to either defend her or apologize to me on her behalf. She was the only woman in the group, and there was definitely some amount of orbiting going on, so I wasn't too surprised. But I was already really annoyed with her by that point, so I informed them all that there would not be another session, and ended the game on the spot. Well, I'd say that OP is not the a-hole here. OP laid out the rules and parameters of the game pretty plainly at the beginning, and everyone, including Hexblade, agreed to them. It's not OP's fault that Hexblade decided to basically be like The Rock and Samuel L. Jackson at the beginning of The Other Guys, and essentially make her character jump off the roof of a high-rise. Hell, OP even gave the titular DM, "Are you sure?" before Hexblade did it. Then for Hexblade to go off on OP for killing her character and using being autistic to demand that OP change the rules of the game is BS. I wish people would stop using their mental health as an excuse to be shitty and demand things from people. And like OP said, she seemed fine with everything else up to that point. I will say, however, that it is a bit unfair to the other players that were actually enjoying OP's world that they built, just to scrap everything entirely. But in the end, nobody is entitled to anyone else's time and effort. Hopefully, OP can revive that world, no pun intended, and can enjoy being a dungeon master again at some point. Let's move on. But before we do, here is Lucky with a quick message. Thanks, buddy. Now, let's get into the story. 5 minutes in my university's tabletop RPG Discord by Reddit user Warm Kitten. On the horror scale, this one is fairly low, I admit. If some of these posts are comparable to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, then in terms of horror, this probably sits more at a mid-rung episode of Goosebumps level. Additionally, it did happen several months ago, so my recollection of the particulars might be a bit fuzzy, but I'll try my best not to misrepresent anything. Anyway, around June or July of last year, I developed the jonesing for some tabletop RPGs and discovered that my university had a club. Very convenient, I thought. I found their Discord server listed on the Facebook group and thought that would be a good way to get my foot into the door and introduce myself. So with my first post, I ask, "How's everyone going?" This was a big mistake, apparently. What followed was an increasingly erratic diatribe from a couple of members about how impersonal and generic the greeting was. At first, I thought they were making a joke that I didn't really get, so I played along. But as I struggled to change the subject, the criticisms became weirdly pointed and aggressive. I had uncorked a massive rant about the insincerity of social mores and how I must clearly have had nothing substantive to say. Since I'm not in the habit of apologizing for observing basic politeness, I instead just tried to get on the subject of maybe joining a game, though this proved to be futile, and I left without another word. I dodged a bullet, I'd say. I ended up finding a campaign off campus that I've been enjoying for 9 months now, and no one gets mad or stroppy when I say hello to them. I'd say the slight inconvenience of having to travel is worth that, in my opinion. Jesus, was the Discord members expecting a song and dance as your first interaction? I think saying hello and how are you are pretty basic ways of starting a dialogue. It just sounds to me like the people in that group are just a bunch of self-important elitists that think that they are above the small-brained, polite small talk that everyone else is accustomed to, and have the edgy mentality of screw your societal norms. So yeah, I agree with OP. Definitely dodged a bullet. Let's move on. And as it is Friday, it is time that we cap off this week of RPG Horror Story Cringe with a more refreshing D&D glory story. DM Legend in the Making: The Man Who Never Played D&D by Reddit user SpiralGMG. I've been DMing for about a few months now. I would consider myself to be a decent DM for a guy who has completely scrapped 3 different campaigns in a row. But this isn't about me. This story is about a friend who has never played D&D before. For the sake of this story, we're going to refer to this person as Robert, or Rob for short. I want to stress again that Rob has never played D&D. He has always been very fond of storytelling, but was never really fond of the idea of a rule set that was used to help tell that story. After I had finished DMing a session, Rob asked both me and another player, who also DMs a separate campaign that I play in, about actually wanting to DM his own campaign. But he felt very distant about the idea because of all the rules that he would need to learn. We both gave our opinions, saying that for the most part, DMing a campaign is more about the improv, and the only thing you really need to know is the basic rules, which in practice are actually not that hard. We also suggested that if they wanted to give it a try, they could always run a one-shot just to see how it feels. After our encouragement, Rob said that he will think about it, in which he then decided that he will do a one-shot a day later to DM it and see if he likes it. However, Rob was very adamant that he did not want to read the player's handbook, as he thought that the book was just too long and that there was no way that he was going to read it. Instead, he made the decision to learn the entirety of the game through Critical Role's Handbooker Helper series on YouTube. And what happened next took me by surprise. After creating a character for the one-shot with a few friends, Rob was ready to DM, and to my surprise, he did a fantastic job. Not only did Rob learn everything they needed to know about the game, but he was also very good at role-playing and doing voices. I've always known that Rob was very charismatic, but I never knew he could do the kinds of things that he could do as a DM. Right from the get-go, it felt like Rob was almost prepared for anything and everything. He had the layout of the city all planned out. The villain Rob portrayed was really menacing and scary. Hell, even I was terrified in certain moments due to circumstances that my character was in. It was all very exciting, and the campaign felt very fleshed out. Even for the first time, Rob felt like a natural, almost as if he had been DMing for years. I would not put him on a pedestal next to Matt Mercer or anything, but it was very clear that Rob had a lot of raw talent, and he knew exactly what he was doing. It also helped that this guy is a walking, talking dictionary, which means that he knows a ton of words that just made the campaign more interesting to listen to overall. It kind of makes me jealous a little bit, because even though he's only DM'd for a day, Rob did a heck of a lot better job than I did during my sessions. I don't want to sound like I'm knocking myself down or anything, because I'm really not. In fact, I relish the idea that I can always get better, and now, after having Rob as my DM, I feel rather humbled and have the urge to get better. I'm telling this story only to say that I feel like we could all use a bit of inspiration in our lives. If someone who has never DM'd before takes the right steps and feels confident that they can achieve the abilities of a great DM, then they can definitely do it. And I know that after that one shot, I have been inspired just a little bit more to want to do so much better to be a great DM for my players. I'll tell you what, I personally kinda needed to hear a story like that, as I will probably be DMing for the first time myself in the coming weeks. And as with doing anything for the first time, I'm admittedly a bit nervous. Though this story just goes to show that even if you are nervous about trying something new, sometimes it's worth getting over that to do so. And who knows, you may just be great at it. I'm gonna have to check out that Handbooker Helper series, as it sounds like it could be beneficial. Also, for my first go, I will just be doing a module. So, to the DMs in my audience, what module do you think would be best for a first timer? I would love to hear your suggestions. But that is all the time we have for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.